Ladies and gents, welcome again with another video. In today's video, I want to discuss decision making. And essentially, the reason why I'm discussing this is because I am making a very big move. And I think it's always that time where, you know when there's like a decision to make, but you don't want to delay it. And I see a lot of people make this mistake that they delay a lot of the most important decision that they make or a pivotal moment in their life, and they will never take action because essentially they do not know how to make decision. And I don't want to waste your time, and that's the main reason why I'm breaking this down is because how do you actually make decisions. And I want to share with you guys my framework that I use on how I make my own decisions, and I thought it would be useful and just to document it as well. There's a lot of ways that I've learned on how to make decisions, right? It's trust your instinct, think logically, right? Think about the people that you truly care about, all these things, right? All of these things. But the truest core essence of it is everybody has their own way of making decisions, right? And there's no clear cut or concise one size fit all answer on how do you make decisions. But personally, this is how I make decisions to, or like my anchor to make decisions. So essentially ask this question to myself: what would my higher self do at this very moment, right? And essentially the higher self is rooted to what does God want me to do at this very moment. Those are the two recurring questions that I ask myself day in and day out. What would my higher self do at this very moment? And what does God want me to do at this very moment? And essentially, I follow those two things militantly, and I make sure that, everything I do is for God. Everything I do is aligned through my higher self, right? And if I would break it down, just in the simplest form too, right? There's always the upsides and downsides, right? I've learned a lot of things on, with Alex Hermosi, and a lot of the guys, that are successful business owners. They have their own, ways on making decisions. They weigh in the upsides, the downsides, right? But essentially, I have like personally for me, I have a couple of things that I take into consideration when I make decisions. First, speed. How long will it take? How fast will it take? Right? I value speed the most. Why? Because the goal is not to get successful once you're a grandpa. That's not the goal. The goal is to become financially free early on in your life, so you can focus on bigger things down the line. And essentially, if you have a big goal, big vision like me, then you need to be able to move with speed, right? So number one, I take into consideration is if I make a decision, speed. Like what's time, what's the opportunity cost if I make this decision, right? Like would this be worth it? How long will it take, right? And then the second thing is efficiency. So I ask myself, how efficient would this how efficient would this decision would be, right? Like essentially the way I ask it always on efficiency is, like, okay, well, is it actually going to be an efficient way to do it? Or is it more, like, because sometimes too it's a little bit different, in each decisions that you make. Sometimes this is the good decision that you should make right now. But if you look at the macro perspective and the long term outcome of the decision, then you're kind of like, okay, well, short term wise, these are the upsides, but long term wise, we might struggle on these things X, Y, and Z. But just depends on what are we prioritizing from now, right? And essentially, I'm on that crossroad right now. Too at this very moment, is I'm like, okay, like what is the micro, success and speed and result we're gonna get if we make this decision, and what will be the macro perspective on the upsides on this decision that I will make. And essentially, it's the same thing too as a closer, right? If you're taking a sales call, you're talking to a prospect, you ask to yourself, okay, is this the time now to move on to the next section of this call? Is this the time now to ask this question? Is this the time now to position this question? Is this the time now to close for the deal, or do we need to build more rapport? Did I push the person to the edge the best that I can, so I can actually truly push the person to make the close, right? So essentially, there's a couple of things that you take into consideration when you're closing. So that's why decision making is very important, right? Or even if you're a leader, right? So essentially, two things right now is time and efficiency, right? How fast is it? Like, what's the workload in it, and what's the upsides, what are the downsides, right? On efficiency. And then their last thing is results, right? I always think about like, what would the outcome would be if I make this decision, right? I just don't look at the upside of things. I look at the downside, like what would I have to sacrifice if I make this decision, right? Because usually there's two options you can take, right? The safer route or the riskier route. And if you feel like you're not willing to take the sacrifice on the riskier route, then I would always default back down to the normal route, right? Which is just do what you're doing already, do what's working, right, and scale that up. But if there's something risky that you want to do, and your upsides is this is the upside X, Y, and Z, but this is the downside. If you do that, this will happen, and this will lead to X, Y, and Z. So now I have to write that down, right? I always make a list. Okay, well, what is this now? Or I even just process this to my mind, like, okay, well, if I take this decision, what would happen? If I do this decision, what would happen, right? What would the outcome? And essentially, the anchor again, what would my higher self do, and what does God want me to do at this very moment? And essentially, those two things are aligned through my biggest goal, my biggest vision. So if they're not aligned to those two main things that I always ask, then what I would do is I seek guidance on a big decision that I'm making, right? Or the second thing is essentially I just go make a decision, even if like 50-50, I don't really know which way to go. I make a decision and try it out for a couple of weeks, couple of months. And then if it's not working out, then I'll reiterate, right? Essentially, that's how I make decisions. I don't want to make this video too long, but that's essentially how I make decision, right? I have two main anchors that I always push for when I'm making decisions. And then there's three main criterias if I'm going to do something or I'm going to decide something, right? The speed, efficiency, and the results, right? I don't want to hinder results for speed. So that's pretty much how I make decisions. I hope you guys found something valuable into it. If you guys were already doing this, let me know in the comment section below. But again, I always leave you this one thing: be a creator, not a consumer. Create something today that will inspire you and others. See you on the other side. Peace out.